Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Pastor Cheryl Kincaid. She is an author, speaker, preacher, and pastor, obviously. Welcome to the show, Pastor Cheryl Kincaid.
Thank you so much for inviting me to come on.
Welcome, welcome to the show. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure a lot of people, not just in India, but across the globe, will benefit from what we are going to talk about. We'll be talking about women empowerment. So, Pastor Cheryl, I want to understand for the audience, you talk a lot about women empowerment. What is it that I thought as a pastor you will talk more about God, but you talk about women empowerment, which is a good thing, good thing. But I just wanted to understand for the audience exactly why do you put so much of emphasis, especially at these times. People say women have got so much of powers, there is so much of equality, though there are still, more areas to be covered. But that's a general perception that I get to hear from different aspects, from different sort of people. Help us understand about this.
Well, first of all, I talk about women being empowered in the power of God, but it's out of my love for God. So it's not as if there's a juxtaposition that either I can talk about God or women empowerment. I talk about them both together. And I talk from a Christian Judean perspective. And Christ spent a lot of time with women, and he spent a lot of time empowering women that everyone else had ignored. And it's remarkable to me that when 2,000 years ago, when the New Testament was written, and God needed a witness of the first resurrection, he didn't choose Peter or John, who were hiding, by the way, because they were scared, but these four courageous women who went to the tomb to dress Jesus up in spices, which was women's job. And he said, don't look for the living among the dead. He is risen. And Mary was the first to carry the message back. The first evangelist in John chapter 4 was a woman that Jesus met at the well, the Samaritan woman. She runs back to Samaria, and he doesn't say, by the way, just keep quiet about it till I find a man to tell you about this. She goes back and she runs back into Samaria, and she says, go meet the man who told me everything I did. So one of the reasons I talk about it is that it's within the scriptures. Were you going to say something? Did I cut you off?
No, okay. Not at all. I was just listening and trying to understand. These are, so why is it that after, when Jesus Christ himself, put so much of emphasis on that, gave that importance to women, why is it that a lot still remains to be covered? Where did someone, led to going to a different path than that was, that should have been taken? Or is it that, we have gone through a wrong path, and because of various reasons? I want to understand then, what is it that you are fighting for? What is it that you want? You call it a gift of empowerment. What is it that women need to understand? Is it that they have themselves not been able to understand this whole thing and get hold of all the empowerment that was there for them to take for themselves?
Well, one of the reasons I started to talk about it, like many women, I was a victim of abuse, and my church wrongly taught me if I was just submissive enough, it would stop, and it did not. It got worse, both as a child and as an adult. And I knew in scripture, I remember reading a passage in Ephesians that God gives the gifts to both male and female. I knew both men and women were created in God's image and deserved that equal respect, but I didn't find words to talk about it. So I wanted to share with other Christian women who often find themselves trapped in violent situations that this is not God's best for you. There are better choices to be made, and you have the right to remove yourself from that situation, since they've already broken the covenant that was before you by not loving you as Christ loved the church. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done because there's a lot of complicit behavior and bad teaching that women need to put up with this. In fact, there was a horrible teaching in the 70s called the umbrella of authority, where it essentially said that it had this picture of this big umbrella and God was on top, but the husband was the wife's umbrella and the wife was under the husband's protection. You know, in Christianity and in Judaism, our relationship with God is atomistic. That's taken from the word Adam. It's us and God. No one comes between us and God. We don't need another umbrella. But what hurt me as a child hearing that is my father was abusive. And I knew that there was no way that I could submit to the things that he did to me. And when I brought it up in church, I think I didn't bring up the abuse because I didn't really have words for it. But when I brought up the fact, but what if your authority is ungodly? Instead of people listening to what I was trying to share, they just gave me, well, you have to be submissive anyway. And so naturally, when it came time to date, I found men who were violent. But praise God, God got me out of there. And then I searched the scriptures again. And that's when I started support groups for survivors of abuse. And I finally wrote a book about it because my PTSD, because when I was a young woman in my 20s, even though the abuse was gone, I started to wake up and hear breathing. And my roommates, who were all Christians, thought it was demons and they tried to cast it out. And it took me a while to realize it wasn't demons, it was memories. And I needed to embrace that little girl who survived the abuse, not cast her out, and learn to be empowered in Jesus Christ and who God created me to be and what he wants me to be. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my books, is to help other women relate to what happened to me and what's probably happened to a lot of them as well.
Right, right, Pastor Cheryl. I want to understand. You talk about submission. So, why is it that we use the word submission? Why does someone else has to talk about submission?
Yeah.
Feminism, or being feminine itself is a great power, and that itself has a lot of, from an Indian point of view, there are issues everywhere. But in terms of, if you see Indian gods, goddesses, and even in household things, women have a lot of power. And there have been issues here. Why do we use the word submission in all this? Why do people have to say that you got to be submissive? Men and women, for long we know they are all equal. All beings are equal. So why do we have to differentiate this? Who did this for what? Was there a particular aim behind it? And this seems to be not only in say in one particular part of the world or one religion, but this seems to be a general thing all across the world. And that is where a lot of talk about women empowerment, women equality is there, which is fair enough. But I just want to understand from your point of view.
Well, first of all, yeah, let's talk a little bit that men and women have differences, and those differences are to be embraced, not to be competed with, and to be enjoyed. So the differences that men and women have are a great joy, and they're a great gift. Oftentimes, because the reason we need to talk about women empowerment is that women still make less than a quarter of the dollar of what a man makes. So she doesn't have a financial empowerment. Secondly, within the home, if the man holds the purse strings, she's dependent upon him, because we often ask, why doesn't she just leave? Well, she's got no place to go and he's got all the money. And in some countries, women don't even have the right to their own children. If they leave, the children stay with the husband. So there's laws that need to be changed. Now, from a Christian Judean perspective, and that's kind of the perspective I come from, there was a scripture in the verse in Ephesians 5 that talked about wives being submissive to their husband. But what people ignore is the chapter begins with submit one to another. In other words, if you're in a marriage, if you're in a romantic relationship, both of you have to give and take some. Otherwise, it's never going to work. And so one to another, that you're each other's servants. And people ignore that. And I think oftentimes because the woman is a caregiver and at home, she's not valued as an individual that's worth something. And you know probably better than I that in some societies, infanticide of young girls is still
Right.
practiced.
Right.
And so I come at the perspective that that human life is sacred. It's created in God's image. And women, and I think you know, as hearing you talk, that a lot of women have done a lot of good in this world, and they bring a lot of joy in this world, and we need to start to embrace that. I think why violence happens is, from my perspective, and I know you might be a different perspective, we call it missing the mark or sin. That means mistakes. People get enraged and they take it out on the person they're closest to. And it takes a while for them to learn that rage doesn't belong to that person. And especially if they've been taught that women are to act a certain way and the woman doesn't act that way, they think it's their job to make her act that way. And it's not their job to do that. This is where therapy does play a good role. If you got a good Christian, a good counselor, period, who comes to you and tells you, you know, it's not your job to fix anyone. And so that's the reality, is that um, the Holy Spirit, we believe, will fix them, or they will empower and fix themselves. But teaching men and women at an early age to share power, that one doesn't have the power and the other is powerless. But they need to share this power. They need to enjoy each other's differences, not compete with them and not compare each other, but just enjoy them and give each other freedom. So in this country, we just had a momentous person die, Rosalind Carter, Jimmy
Right.
Carter's wife.
Right.
She had tremendous freedom in that marriage. And I know that specifically that they came from a background that didn't give Southern Baptist, that wouldn't have given her that much freedom. But she had a husband who understood that his wife was talented, and he said it more than once. And she had gifts to offer the world, and so he could let go of his grasp on her and let her flourish, and it made a happier marriage. Keeping a woman in her place doesn't make a happy marriage. And you may have heard the statement, happy wife, happy life. You know, if you want your spouse to be happy, you're going to do everything you can, but you should want your spouse to be happy for no other reason than it makes you happier. A happy family makes you happier. But we dishonor God when we dishonor his image. And women need to realize that they have a life force, that they have God inside of them just as much as men. And they're on equal footing with men.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of talk has been going for the last several decades about women empowerment. There was this feminism, also a lot of talk, and and then movement, almost like a movement. People have their own views of it. So, where do we stand in terms of women empowerment as of today? Have we covered a lot of ground? A lot of ground needs to be covered. See, you talk a lot about Charles Dickens. So let's talk about Charles Dickens here. In his way, I ask you, what is it, the best of time for women empowerment, or is it the worst of time for women empowerment? Let's understand in that perspective.
So we come from two different countries. So I'll speak from my country perspective, because I know you know your country's perspective better. Things have gotten better. When I was a little girl, my mom couldn't have her own checking account. And that was why she stayed in her violent relationship. She also had no control for birth control. In order for a woman to get birth control, she had to go to her husband. And during that time, very few women owned homes or could own their own credit card. Nowadays, and it happened within my lifetime in the 1970s, women got that power to have a job, to have their own credit and credit score, to own their own home, and to have control over their own bodies. However, we're still paid one third that men are paid. And money's, it's not that I'm a materialist, but money is power in this world. There are more women in the United States in shelters than men right now, and more women of color would double that are in shelters. Although there are more women college graduates, we still will make 1/3 that a man makes during his whole lifetime. So we haven't gotten it as far as laws go, as far as fairness of society as a whole. And you can make laws, but you can't change people's hearts overnight. So it takes discussing it, like here you and I are talking about, for people to contemplate: do I treat women a little less than me, or am I trying to control my wife? Am I treating her more like a child than like a human being? Am I competing with her as opposed to embracing her differences? When she does something good, do I try to outdo it, or do I just say, "Good job, hun"? And then she has the opportunity to say, "Good job" to me. Is it a true partnership? Because that's why marriage was created, was to be a partnership, a covenant. And do I cover up other men's violence? Do I just say boys will be boys? And that mentality has got to stop. Not all men beat their wives. Not all men molest their children. So the remark "men will be men" is a ridiculous remark. That's not all men. If a man does that, he's out of order, and he needs other men to call him to an account of it, and even to bring the law. Oftentimes when I ran my group for survivors of abuse, we had more than one woman who would call the police, and the police would side with the abuser. Now, this was in the 80s, so some time has passed and people are more educated, but I got to tell you, it still happens. So it's a matter of us viewing each other as really created in God's image, as valued, and not feeling the need to control people. Now, we understand we have to raise children up, so we have to put limits on them. But a woman is not a child. She shouldn't be put on that same level. And men and women have to do this hard work of compromise, of working together. And compromise is compromise. It's both of you making a promise that you're going to bring it down a little. And that's hard work. And it's easy and cowardly to say, "I'm the man and this is the way it's going to be." That's too easy and it doesn't work. And even if a man doesn't hit his wife and says that, I would share with them, but you don't know what's going to happen to your daughters, because you've just showed an example that they're not full human beings. So you've got to look at it differently. You've got to look at each other's as equals. And you've got to look at each other's as different. I'm not trying to take away the differences, but in that differences, embracing the differences and stop ridiculing and mocking the differences. I think our public television and our movies do that enough. In most romantic comedies, we see people mocking each other, then they fall in love. In reality, that'd be very hurtful. That's not how relationships work. So teaching people, stop mocking and ridiculing each other's differences. Stop competing with one another. Instead, enjoy each other's differences. Enjoy the quirks of that other person's personality. Something about that quirk attracted you to them in the first place. Nurture it, but don't mock it. Don't ridicule it. And don't try to control them. Work together on having household rules and a household budget. And make in that budget, making sure that everyone's needs are being met, not just one person. In any marriage, sacrifice has to happen. We all know that, or it'd never work. But it's mutual sacrifice. It's mutual giving and taking, not one person being the boss and the other person being subservient.
Okay. Let me ask you this way. What does ideal women empowerment look like? Is it about, people, many places people talk about that, okay, in the name of fight for more powers or this feminist movement and all, a lot of men are also getting victimized. So that I want to understand in that backdrop, what does ideal women empowerment look like? Will that also include, because a lot of section of people say I am getting victimized, because in various countries different laws have also come up. That's up to them. But this is, I gather, that there is a bit of a complaint. Even in India, there are men's rights group now, in terms of they getting problems because people are misusing such laws which are there for the betterment of women, but in several cases, you know how it is. So I want to get your perspective on that.
Well, first of all, 1 out of every 3 women are abused in worldwide. So that's the statistic. It's 1 out of every 20 men are. So the statistic is different, but I'm not going to demean the man who's been abused. Um, so that goes back to enjoying each other's differences and not ridiculing and mocking them. So I get equally concerned when I see masculinity constantly being ridiculed and mocked. I don't think that's appropriate either. There's masculine, there's feminine. Both of them have wonderful things in them. And I would argue that both of us have a masculine side and a feminine side that we take into the world. So, but ideal empowerment would mean that women were paid equally to men, that women, young girls, were trained up to say yes, be open to love and be open to having a family if that's what you feel called to do, but know that you deserve to be respect and you don't have to baby someone. You don't have to take, you don't have to put up with physical or emotional abuse. It would mean adequate housing for women once they have left a violent relationship. Because I don't think we're going to stop. You talk about ideal, there's not going to be an ideal world where violence is going to stop in my lifetime. As long as there's human beings, people will get angry and do cruel things. And the reality is, even though we want to say that we're equal, men are stronger than women. And when they raise their hand or when they grab her, they're more apt to hurt her. And a man born in a good family, his father will teach him, by the way, you're stronger than she is. So you check your temper, okay? That's just good fatherly advice. To understand that just because we're different than men doesn't mean we're weaker, but it does mean that we are more dependent in some ways. So it's empowerment of human beings, I guess. But right now we're nowhere near it when it comes to women in poverty, when it comes to women losing their children, when it comes to the painful things that women go through in romantic relationships. And so right now, my prayer is that we'll be able, and you have to respect different religious differences. I know there are countries where women have to cover their heads, and I get that they have to cover their bodies, and that's a different religious tradition than I'm from. But within that, she has to be given a role of respect and dignity. And a lot of it is doing what you and I are doing, is talking about it, is let people talk about that we're not there yet. We want to be there, but we're not there. So in America, when Barack Obama was elected president, there were some people walking around saying, well, I guess bigotry's over now. We have a black president. And anybody who's a person of color will say, no, it's not, nowhere near it. One black man succeeded and he was exceedingly brilliant. And by the way, he happened to be raised by a white family. So that gave him some privileges as well. But he and his wife were extraordinary people and they made it. And the laws that were there that prohibited them are gone. But that doesn't mean that the myriads of ethnic people in the United States that feel persecution, that rod of oppression has been lifted. We know that that's not true. And the same as with women, we can point out one woman who makes it, or how many women go to college. And the reality is, yes, we go to college, but we still don't make enough money. And yes, there's a lot of women still trapped in violence. And yes, the stereotype of a woman being unintelligent in a sitcom is there, and the man being intelligent and sorting out the things for the women is there. But I don't like it, like I already said, when masculinity is ridiculed either. So I guess it would be, we would stop ridiculing each other's differences and embrace them and enjoy them, would be ideal women empowerment.
Right, right. Let me understand this. As you said that men and women both have been, made in God's image, and this a lot of religious leaders also say. So when God Himself, herself, if we whatever we want to look at it, has said this, then why does the church has to say something about forgiveness, about submission. What is it that has gotten lost in translation? The words of God got lost in translation and put forward by the church. I want to understand, for a common person, why is it so? When we all know that they all have been made in the image of God.
Mhm. Yeah, well, our holy writings, as your writings too, are open to interpretation. So that's one thing. People will pick out the verses that they want to embrace. I think women have been lifted up in where Christianity has spread a lot. I think the first feminists, although people laugh at me, are nuns. They said St. Clare of Assisi started this back in the 3rd century. She said, I'm not going to get married. I'm going to wear this havoc to say I'm off the market, and I'm going to serve. I'm going to be a career woman in serving other people in the name of Jesus. And out of St. Clare of Assisi and later Florence Nightingale came the skilled craft of nursing. And it came out of caring for the poor and just cleaning up the areas where so people wouldn't die. And so within the scriptures, there's a lot of women empowerment, but there are people who interpret the scriptures differently. They'll say women are created in God's image, but they're created to serve man. And I've been in debates with those Christians as well. And I say, no, they were created to serve God. And we discuss the scriptures of Romans. And oftentimes I've gotten a lot of men mad at me, but I continue to press my perspective. I think that there's a Simon and Garfunkel song called Old Friends, and it says, a man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest, is the line in that song. And sometimes that's what people do. They just hear what they want to hear. And I think Jesus knew that when he left the earth, even though he had lifted women up, he understood he was leaving them in a misogynistic role here on earth. But women have slowly empowered themselves. The first Presbyterian minister in my denomination was ordained in 1972, but women have been preaching. There's a woman named Louisa Worsley and Amy McPherson in the 1800s and the 1700s. The hymn writers, most of them were women. So men sing words about God that were written by women every Sunday, even those who don't believe women can teach and preach. But so we've had to do this on our own some, I think by the power of God, but it's been a long road, and it's all over the world. There was a time when women used to have to be burned with their husbands when he died. And I think that's changing as well. There was a time when women would be stoned to death if there wasn't blood on the sheets the first night that she was married. That's changing. Not fast enough, but it is changing. And one of our jobs as human beings of goodwill is to continue to say women aren't being treated well. What can we do to treat it better? As opposed to, well, a few women have made it, therefore there isn't a problem of empowerment anymore, when there is. And there is a problem of violence all over the world.
Right, right. You have written several books, Cheryl, Pastor Cheryl. So, how have you dealt this topic of women empowerment in these books?
Yeah, so I wrote, you can find my books at revcherylkincaid.com. But the first one I wrote was, there was a book called Carrie's Thorn. It's about a girl aging out of foster care. And I tried to deal with the bigotries in the religious community in that book. Even though it was fictitious, I used examples from women who are my support group, as well as examples from my own life of the bigotry they faced in the church. And the idea that men did not believe women when they came forward and said, I've been abused. There's a wonderful play by William Shakespeare. This shows how far it goes back. And Shakespeare was in the 1500s, where a nun was being abused by a man, and she says that she'll tell the whole world, and he replies, but who will believe you? Isabel, who will believe you? So that's still reality. People don't believe women. So I put that in the book as well. And then the second book to that is called A Forgotten Door, called Home. And it's about a woman who was taken out of the home in foster care, and she's trying to make a home, which isn't easy to do. I also wrote a book called Hearing the Gospel Through Dickens, A Christmas Carol, where I line up the 5 lessons of Advent with the 5 spirits that visit Ebenezer Scrooge. The word Ebenezer in Hebrew means the Lord has brought me thus far. But that talks about, again, power and using our power wrongly, and learning to release our power and use it for charity and good, as opposed to using it just to take care of ourselves.
Wonderful. Wonderful. There is much to learn about all these things from you, Cheryl. And I'm sure a lot of people would like to, learn from you directly through your book. So, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so I mentioned my website, revcherylkincaid.com. It's REV, then just my name, CHERYLKINCAID .com. And there's links to Amazon. For most of the books can be bought on Amazon. The Hearing the Gospel Through Dickens, A Christmas Carol can only be bought through the publisher, but you can get a link to the publisher. There's 2 other books, The Little Clay Pot, which is about a pot that envies other pots, but it realizes that it's unique in the end of the book. And The Little Candle That's Frightened of the Dark, which is the Advent story. Each candle is teaching the story of how Jesus came. So all my books, you can find them on Amazon.com, except for Hearing the Gospel. You can find it at Cambridge Scholars, and all the links are on my website, revcherylkincaid.com.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.